And welcome back, UCF fans. We are previewing all 12 of the night's opponents, and we're going to go right into week two, kicking off the month of September with the Sam Houston Bearkats. And joining me today is Colton Foster of the Huntsville Item. Colton, how are you?
Doing good, Chris. Just hanging in there. How about yourself?
I'm doing all right. Give us before we get started with the questions, give us kind of a summary of Sam Houston, because like UCF, they made a big jump last year. They went from the FCS level to Conference USA, a very familiar stomping ground of UCF's. Is where they were from 2005 to 2012. So give us kind of a rundown of year one for Sam Houston in that league.
Yeah, they took some lumps. They finished 3-9 on the year, or four, wherever the record was. I can't remember now. I'm sorry. Um, and they wound up finishing strong. They hit a rough patch in the beginning, but they also faced a gauntlet to start their Conference USA start. They faced BYU, Houston, and just an absolute gauntlet of teams to just get their under their belt, Air Force included. And I think a lot of people were caught surprised in that BYU game. They lost, but it was a 14-0 game, and their defense really proved that they were going to be a force. And that was a trend for most of the year. It was just the offense kind of struggled at times, and eventually it kind of caught up to them, and they figured it out. But it just took some time, and they got their lumps.
Yeah, to your point on the offense, they averaged 19.6 points per game. They were 111th in the FBS last year. They averaged 2.9 yards per carry, about 6 yards per passing attempt, for 36% on third down. So when you look back at it, and when you spoke to Casey Keeler at the end of the year, what stood out as far as trying to fix the offense? What were some of the main points of emphasis for him and his staff?
As weird as it is, it was injuries at multiple points in the season. They had a walk-on running back playing receiver, and vice versa. They were down. Their two starting running backs went down, and I think it was against Houston for Zach, and then John Gentry he would come back for a game, then miss 2 games, then come back, then miss 3 games. They just ran out of. At the end of the day, they ran out of depth on an offense, and with the first-year offensive coordinator for the program, it was just kind of one of those stepping stones that they struggled to find their ground, but eventually they were able to find it and kind of hit a groove there in that last 4 game stretch.
Yeah, they went 3-1 in November, even though they went 0-8 to start the season. The quarterback position, I think, is going to be certainly of interest here going into the fall. Grant Gunnell starting. Jace Bauer comes in from Central Michigan. How do you forecast that sort of QB battle, and what have you gathered as far as information on those two guys is concerned?
All signs are kind of pointing to Jace Bauer to be the starter for, say, this season. He came in from Central Michigan and I don't want to say blew anybody away, but Keeler mentioned during spring ball that they didn't feel like they had some of the like weapons around him that would make him stronger that they do here at Sam. And they're just really proud of him, what he's doing. And as far as Grant, he's gone around a little bit, and now he's at Sam. And he was here last year, got one start against Houston. Was on the field. I don't even know if he was. I don't think he was on the field for the first touchdown because they ran it with a running back, and then he never really saw the field again throughout the season. He's a Texas guy, so that always holds a little bit here at Sam. But it seems like Jace Bauer is going to be kind of the starter as long as. And their biggest thing too with that is getting a lot of their receivers healthy for training camp to be able to kind of prep the offense in that way rather than some of the lower end guys that are there for depth.
In prepping to talk to you, one of the things that stood out to me about Sam Houston was their struggles in the first quarter. They were outscored 82-48 last year in the first period. So, were there some trends that you noticed as far as the way they were starting games to where they were digging themselves into holes they weren't eventually able to kind of get themselves out of?
It was weird because yeah, they started out down very fast in a lot of games, but it never felt like it was so it was always kind of like just random mistakes here and there caused it. It wasn't always like, hey, Keegan threw an interception and there's a pick six. It was always kind of like you just kind of would glance at the scoreboard and all of a sudden they were down by 7 or 10 or 14. But a lot of their slow start, I mean, just getting some of the guys on the field that, were out there were probably not necessarily ready for FBS play. And they just kind of were just at a points in time, it felt like they were just kind of people putting people out there that were just warm bodies to kind of go out there and try to get through games.
Another area I imagine is going to be of emphasis this coming fall is the pass rush for Sam Houston. They had just 17 sacks as a team last year. New defensive coordinator coming in, and Skylar Cassidy. Maybe some impressions that you've gathered from him, and how much of that is going to be on his plate to try to improve that pass rush.
Yeah, that's going to be a big thing. Keeler mentioned in the spring that they've been in the weight room. They pushed back their spring ball to get more time in the weight room to get bigger, faster, and stronger, as everybody says. And it's going to be a completely new, outside of Javon Leon, defensive line for these guys. It'll be another. I think it'll be their second straight year of a complete or near complete rebuild of the defensive line, and it's really just going to kind of fall on them to try to get into it. Javon Leon's been a staple, but he was another guy that battled injuries last year. They went out and brought in Richard Outland brought him in. And then there's a couple more that are just going to have to share the reps. But ultimately, at the end of the day, that was a big part. They couldn't get pressure. I don't remember exactly how many tackles for losses, but, just getting into the backfield and kind of wrecking havoc was always it felt like it was an issue all year for them. And, it's going to be something that new defense coordinator Skylar Cassidy is going to have to get in there and kind of get in there and fix.
And then another thing that stood out, I mentioned the struggles at the beginning of games. They also had 5 one-score losses. So these are a lot of close. For 3-9 team, you just kind of look at the record and assume it was more of a struggle than it actually was. But Sam Houston was in a lot of these games. So how are they addressing not only late game situations, but maybe the depth required to withstand an FBS season? How have they gone about those issues?
Like I said, they've hit the weight room a little bit more to try to keep people healthy, but that was what it was last year. I mean, health. At the end of the day, they were trotting out their guys that were, 6, 7 on the depth chart, 3, 4, and the 1s, 2s aren't there anymore. So now all of a sudden, there's no more, there's no rest. I remember, I think it was the UTEP game, but I think it was like 13 seconds they go down and score and win, and it's just like.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even know how it happened. It was, one quick pass to the outside and then one over the middle, timeout, field goal, game over. Just stuff like that. I mean, it was kind of crazy just how it all happened at the end of that season. And like I said, I really think it just attributes to the amount of guys they had healthy last year and getting a lot of those guys back and in full health and, be able to have 2, 3, 4 guys be able to play all the way to the end of games is going to be a big key difference this year.
I've asked each of the writers, and I will ask each of the writers going forward about a preview for this game in particular. Sam Houston coming to UCF. You mentioned they played a couple teams in the Big 12 last year, BYU and Houston. So does that experience give them a little more confidence going on the road for a game like this? And how do you like their chances against UCF?
Yeah, I think it gives them, confidence going in for sure. Both of those games were on the road, albeit the, U of H game's a bus ride for us up here. But they went to BYU in their first season. Going to UCF, I mean, I'd say it's probably favored for UCF. But it's really just going to see what kind of happens at the beginning of the season for them. Just if they can, with Rice, if they can get rolling, in game 1, that was their biggest thing last year. They would get rolling and then they'd hit a bump. And if they can just keep rolling, I mean, I think they could probably compete with some of the top schools. It's just a matter of how well they'll perform and if they can keep everything rolling and stay healthy.
I know they were 0-8 last year, as I mentioned, 3-9 overall, but Casey Keeler was 85-27 at the FCS level. They were a regular contender for the FCS national champion. I imagine with the second year and kind of an opportunity to right some wrongs, I imagine they're going to be a lot tougher this time around. Probably more reminiscent of what they were in November than what they were this time last year. Colton, tell us about where people can find your work and where they can find you on social media.
So you can find work at itemonline.com And you can find me on Twitter at X at Colton Foster 98.
And you can find me on X at Chris Boyle, DBNJ, UCF fans. We'll have plenty of content as we get ready for the season. We're going to preview, as I mentioned, all 12 of the Knights' opponents, and we'll have plenty on the Knights themselves throughout the rest of the summer as we get ready for week number 1, a Thursday night game against New Hampshire. Colton, thanks so much for your time, and we'll see you again down the road.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.